and welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. I'm your host, Jack Eddy, and today I'm so excited because joining me is Rita Orlov of PostCurious, the amazing publishers of Tale of Ord. Welcome to the show, Rita.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you have no idea how excited I am about this, because if anyone has read my Tale of Ord reviews, which I did 2 of them, I am so in love with everything having to do with this, like, narrative, puzzle, adventure, game, tabletop experience thingy. So maybe the best way of kind of starting this off is for the audience. What is your, like, nutshell pitch of what Tale of Ord is, and what's the PostCurious oeuvre? I
would say PostCurious is an immersive tabletop puzzle game company. The Tale of Ord is basically, it's kind of hard to describe it in a couple words. It's sort of an interactive puzzle adventure that's told through 4 packages that are full of objects inside of them and full of clues that you have to solve that progress the story.
Yeah, like intrigue and mystery and suspense. Like, the best thing that I can tell anyone is that this is kind of in the vein of what you might think of as escape rooms, but on your table, but also outside of your table, and delivered to you, and so much more immersive and intriguing than any escape room experience I've had. And there's a real tight narrative that you follow along and are progressing through. And the level of complexities, oh man, I could just gush about this over and over again, or instead you could just go and read the reviews, which is probably the best way of actually giving you an idea. Unfortunately, those are pretty spoiler free. So we're going to get into some of that today. We're going to steer clear of spoilers. And as usual, as you've come to expect out of the Cardboard Herald, today we're getting to know Rita. So with that said, now that we have the context there, let's talk about what got you into doing this whole PostCurious shindig. What's your introduction to gaming?
That's a tough question, because I'm not really sure how to answer that.
Let's take your best stab at it.
It's sort of a very odd winding journey. I mean, my introduction to, like, games would be, like, playing chess as a 3-year-old.
Whoa. You're playing chess as a 3-year-old? Who is making 3-year-old Rita play chess at home? Is this like your parents, grandparents, siblings?
My dad was super into chess. He wanted to be a grandmaster when he was a teenager. My family is Russian, so chess was like a pretty big thing in Russia in general, but also my dad was an enthusiast, and I took I had like a math tutor when I was 3 or 4, and if we were finished with our lessons early, we would play chess. So that's kind of probably the first, like, games that I've played.
You know, some parents really install, like, you know, music lessons at a real early age, and then other parents are having their 3-year-old have a math tutor and then go on to have leisurely bouts of chess afterwards.
I am actually really mad that they didn't make me take music classes.
Are you a musician now?
I sing and I play, like, a little bit of guitar.
Oh, okay. Do you read music?
No.
Because that does play into the... I don't want to spoil too much of Tale of Ord, but the amount of disciplines that are involved, like, there is a musical aspect to it as well. Like, the sheer amount of things that appeared in front of me that I had to go, like, who researches this stuff? Like, who knows all of these disciplines and then ends up researching the ones that they don't know in order to include in this crazy, like, puzzle madness? It really blew me away. So, like, immediately I knew if you weren't a musician, you at least had some sort of affinity for music. But I'm interrupting your story. So you're getting your chess lessons at a young age. Did your dad ever pursue that grandmaster dream of his? Was he playing in tournaments, anything like that?
No, but he does still play on Yahoo Online Chess to this
Nice.
day. Yeah, I mean, I played like card games and board games and stuff, but nothing really out of the norm for most of my life up until like pretty recently, when I realized that there are actually so many other cool board games out there that I had no idea existed. But I did always play puzzle games, though. I think pretty early on, I played this PC game called Siberia, which really kind of encompasses all the things that I really like about games, and I'm sure has inspired things in this game because it tells a story really well, and the puzzles are integrated perfectly into it. It's a point and click from like the early 2000s, I want to say.
Interesting. I can see some overlap in that. Now that you mention it, there is kind of like a Myst or Seventh Guest aspect to the whole PostCurious thing that I hadn't previously thought about. But yeah, there is some sort of lineage that you could draw there. I've never played the game that you mentioned, but that's interesting. And I always love when these outside influences start infiltrating the tabletop gaming world. So who inflicted the modern hobby of board games to you, and how did that transition into like this actual pursuing of making your own thing?
So actually, how I ended up doing this was a little bit after I graduated college. I worked for an escape room for 2 years, and
so I wasn't too off base there.
No, not at all. I mean, I don't know. Maybe like I played a lot of puzzle games, but I don't know if it really occurred to me earlier in my life that I could actually design them. But so I worked for an escape room. After I was there for a little while, I also did some like set design and puzzle design. And after I left, I was still really excited about puzzles, and I wanted to design more of them, but I didn't want to open an escape room. So the thing that made the most sense was to try to make a tabletop game. And I started working on that at some point, and in that pursuit, I just kind of started reading more about game design and like meeting more people who play games. And by doing that, discovering what other games are out there. I made a friend in my neighborhood who literally has a closet full of board games. So he's been doing a really good job at introducing me to some new games. And we try to play games that have like different play styles, and just to kind of, experience different things.
Totally. Just so I can get a good feel for the rest of the puzzle here growing up. You grew up in New York?
I grew up kind of all over the place. I lived in Israel until I was 9, and then I lived in Canada, in Vancouver for a few years. Went to high school on Long Island, and then I went to college in Providence, and now I'm in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. All over the place, legit. So were you actually born in Israel?
I was born in Russia.
Okay, so born in Russia. And what had your parents just traveling all around? What's their gig?
Nothing really out of the ordinary. We were just kind of one of those families that left Russia for Israel, as many like Jewish families were doing in the early 90s. And then at some point, I don't know, we just decided to move to Canada. Unfortunately, I don't have a better answer for that.
No, that's interesting. And all of these components and the multicultural view and different perspectives, I mean, all of it filters into the creative work that someone does. You have a lens that is able to view things with multiple disciplines, with multiple perspectives. Artistically, it's got to feed into your work in one way or another. I mean, I've talked about on the show how I grew up primarily in Alaska, but I spent some time in Southeast Asia as a kid, and my dad worked for immigration. In fact, in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, he was going over to Pakistan regularly, working with Afghani refugees during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, which was why we were stationed in India, and then we ended up moving to Alaska. So, this kind of perspective and moving all over the place, I mean, it's got to have some sort of bearing on what you actually do and who you are now, even if it's not exactly like some super compelling story that brought you around, or that, your parents were jet setting around or starting up, I don't know, all sorts of NGOs and different places like that. But you're in Brooklyn now, and did I read right that you design furniture as well? Like you have a professional gig doing some sort of other design?
So I went to the Rhode Island School of Design and I majored in furniture design. I don't make furniture at the moment. I do work for a custom carpet company where I do some design, and basically I do the art and the graphics, and occasionally also get to do design work.
Well, there's a ton of physicality to the Tale of Ord, and some of the components are just meticulously crafted, both in form and function. They're beautiful, but also physically intricate in important ways that are aspects of actually solving the thing itself. How much of your experience in, I guess, majoring in furniture design, how much did that impact your craft work in the Tale of Ord?
Majorly, for sure. When I actually started college, I thought I was going to be an illustration major. And one of the foundation classes that they make us take freshman year is 3D design. Mm-hmm. And I just ended up really liking the 3D design class much more than drawing, and I realized that I was actually better at it. So I ended up trying to kind of see which direction to go, and I ended up spending a lot of time in the wood shop, and I was like, well, there's your answer, I guess. So yeah, but I really like making physical objects, and I think the interaction design with those physical objects is really the most interesting part. Mm-hmm. But if I'm gonna send things to your house, then it's probably more interesting if they're gonna be three-dimensional, because otherwise, if it's just paper, it's like something you can print out on your own.
Yeah, totally. Well, legit, for any of you curious about this thing, if you read the reviews, there are items from this that are sitting on my shelf at home that I just occasionally walk by and look at and marvel that it has functionality to it, that I received this in a package, and this is going to be like a cherished item on our shelf to give us memories and to feel like we were at that moment in time as we were on the precipice of solving this whole freaking thing, especially the stuff that comes at the end, but also some of the really clever stuff in the earlier chapters. First, what kind of time frame was it in developing Tale of Ord? From the time that you had the inception of it, the initial idea, to the time that you were ready to start sending things out?
First, I just want to say it's great to hear that you are keeping things on your shelf, because really, one of my goals with those objects is to kind of leave people with some sort of keepsake from the experience, because otherwise, it is a one and done experience in that sense. So, you don't want to be left with a bunch of stuff that you're going to end up throwing away. So it's nice to hear that you like those objects enough to keep them.
You want to know what kind of importance I'm putting on these. On this same shelf, I have my 1960s hardbound copy of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Whoa, I get to be on the same shelf.
On the same shelf as the Lord of the Rings, my ancient really copy. Honored. My signed Game of Thrones, the original book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, as if someone out there doesn't know what a Game of Thrones is. And then also is the artifacts that are held from the final chapters. And one of the artifacts, which I think you've actually put out there in a lot of imagery, I'm calling them artifacts because they really do feel like something that you're discovering from a lost civilization, is kind of like a pendant. I'm not going to tell you what it actually is for, but that thing we have assuredly set aside as a dedicated Christmas ornament that is going to exist long into the future, that my child will surely be like, what the heck is this thing from?
That's really funny because I also think it would make a great Christmas ornament, but it occurred to me that it's also like super pagan looking, which might not be the best thing for Christmas.
In some ways, that may be the perfect Christmas ornament. I mean, if you're getting really down to what is the holiday and the celebration. So I think we can make some sort of compromise out of that.
That's true.
And there's something to be said about a Jewish girl making a pagan object that is going on a Christmas tree. It's multicultural.
I guess you could look at it that way.
Yeah, it's, an experience of sharing and also togetherness. So it's all within the Christmas spirit.
That is the true Christmas spirit.
So how long did it take you to get this thing going and actually start sending out packages?
So it took about 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, which I didn't think it was going to take that long, but having a full-time job, it's like hard to devote as much time to doing it as I would actually like to. But I think ultimately, like, it was a really good learning experience and totally worth the time, and I'm pretty happy with how it ended up. But a lot of it was, doing it for the first time, a lot of it was just like figuring out how to make things and then how to have them made. And this was like kind of my first dive also into the playtesting process. About
how many times during the process of developing this did you want to give up?
Oh, never.
Never? There was never a time where you're like, oh my God, this is too much. Like the intricacies of this thing, I'm amazed that it never felt like you were being completely defeated or like you were just having one of those nights where you're like, you know what? Maybe it would be better if I just cut my losses and did something less ambitious. What kept you going?
I just wanted to see it happen. I mean, I'm sure there were a couple moments where I was like, oh God, is this even gonna be anything good? But then I was just like, no, it has to be good. I'm going to make it good.
What was the moment that you knew you had something real good?
I don't know if there was such a moment. I guess maybe the first time that somebody played it and had like a really good reaction, I was like, okay, this is actually going to be a good game.
You didn't know until that point? I mean, like when I think about creative process, I often think about music, and when you're working on a song, you kind of know, like, yeah, this is shaping into something that's worth developing and cultivating, and like you finally got a chorus that you've been trying to bang out, or you finally got a guitar riff or something on the piano, or you figure out the drum beat, something that you realize like, oh, I have a core here that I know is really good if I can just figure out the surroundings. There wasn't some moment throughout the designing process where you're like, oh man, as soon as people get to this, I know this is going to kill them.
Well, I mean, I guess I always believed that it would be good because otherwise I wouldn't have done it.
Totally.
But I didn't, I don't know. I can't always make assumptions of how things will be received.
That must have been a huge relief when you actually got it out, and it appears like, aside from the reviews I've done, I've been trying to follow PostCurious, and it seems like overall it's just been a really positive reaction to the whole thing.
Yeah, it has. I'm pretty happy about that.
So 2 years. 2 years of development, and this is one of the most ambitious projects that I could imagine as a first-time development type of gamey thingy. We're still kind of dancing around what exactly is the best way of calling this, but if you were doing it again, what have you learned now that you would change in your approach of creating the game, or that you're definitely going to implement in the next thing that you work on?
Well, I am starting to work on a new thing.
Ooh.
And I think my goal is to like integrate the story with the puzzle even more. So I'm trying to work a little bit more on like story development, and I guess there's a little bit I can think ahead about things a little bit more than I could have before, because there are just things that I didn't know at the time that I can kind of predict now will happen.
Yeah. Again, going back to the many levels of discipline that are involved in this thing, from music to writing poetry to writing riddles to intricate physical puzzles to all sorts of word game puzzles and numerology and mythology and creative and cryptic writing, all this kind of stuff. Is there something that you can talk about without spoiling the audience that was really the toughest aspect to bang out?
Yeah, definitely. I did a lot of head banging. Well, so it's slightly spoilery, but I don't think it's really that spoilery because I've posted photos of things on social media, so I will say what the object is. But so one of the packages has some rose petals in it. Mm-hmm. Figuring out how to execute making those and making them actually look good and do what they're supposed to do was quite a task, and probably took up a significant portion of my prototyping time, as did the wooden box, which really took a lot of testing and redoing and frustration.
Who do you test these games on? Do you have like a local group there? Do you bring it to your family and say, "Hey, quit playing chess, Dad. I need you to check out this thing"?
Well, I mean, the box I would have to test it myself, just in terms of like, does it physically work? But in terms of the play testing, I found I tested it on a few friends, and then I actually like connected with people through like other contacts that I knew from escape room playing, and I made some friends by having them test my game, actually. So
how did you kind of gauge yourself when you're trying to figure out what's the right balance between being difficult enough that it's really satisfying to solve, but not so difficult that it's just going to be frustrating, especially when you have no control over what sort of level of experience that your audience has with this type of thing?
Yeah, well, so before I started this, I actually had played a game which in some ways was similar, and there were some satisfying solves in it, but it was also extremely difficult that at some points I was just like, what? This is what you want me to do? And well, so when I talk about escape rooms and puzzle games in general, I think a difficult puzzle, or rather a good puzzle, whether it's difficult or not, if you don't get it, but afterwards your reaction is, oh, I understand now, or like, oh, I should have gotten that.
Right.
That means that it made sense. Whereas if your reaction is, why would it be this? How was I supposed to know that? Then that's on the other end of the spectrum.
Well, so compliments to you then, because every single puzzle that we didn't get, because there were a couple of those, and thankfully you had that awesome hint system, which I gave a ton of praise to in both of the reviews. There were a couple where it felt like we have no idea what to do next. And then as soon as we got the hints, it's like, oh, of course that's what it is. Though in retrospect, who knows if we ever would have gotten there. We may have just continued to be like, I don't know exactly what to do next. We needed the hint to proceed, but it still felt logical, and somehow the logic of that particular situation eluded us. Thankfully, the grand majority of everything, we were able to figure it out on our own, or just get little gentle nudging through the hints. And even the hints that were taking us beyond that point where we couldn't make the jump on our own never fully spoiled the solution to the overall puzzle. And so we still had the satisfaction of figuring it out. But yeah, definite kudos to you for making something that was logical and did have that result that you're looking for of a good puzzle that, yeah, in the end, the clues were there. We just weren't picking up what you were putting down.
Well, people people work in different ways, and some people will get stuck on certain things and other people will get stuck on others that, might seem obvious to the other person. So, I mean, in playtesting, definitely if every single group gets stuck on one thing, then you know that something probably needs to be changed about that thing. But if some people get it and some people need a hint or two, then that's kind of a good level, I think, because that means that it is challenging and probably satisfying to solve.
Right.
But isn't necessarily immediately obvious when you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, I know what to do here.
This game, The Tale of Ord, because I do want to get to what projects you're working on next, but I still have to know more about The Tale of Ord. It's set in the real world, and it kind of transcends the bounds of what you expect out of a game or a puzzle on your table. Like, you really have a sense of immersion in it, but a lot of the narrative heavily surrounds research and archaeology and discovery with Norse mythology. Why did you go with Norse mythology as kind of the main setting there, aside from Vikings just being so hot right now?
It never really occurred to me that Vikings were hot, especially when I started doing this.
Vikings are the new zombies. Come on. I mean, you have a very, very compelling and original story surrounding that, but there are so many Viking board games, so many Norse board games, and even television shows with, like, the popularity of Vikings.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, aside from, like, the TV show, I definitely didn't know at the time that there were this many Viking-themed games. And I mean, also, the Tale of Ord doesn't really have Vikings in it. It's more about the mythology. But when I started thinking about it, I just wanted to make something different, because a lot of sort of mystery tabletop puzzle games are, solve the murder. And I just wanted to kind of delve into a topic and a theme that I hadn't really seen before. So I just came up with some ideas, and Norse mythology seemed really intriguing because I hadn't seen it before, and there's so much cool art and there's so many cool characters to kind of draw from. So I was just immediately inspired by that and got a lot more ideas for it. So I kind of just went with it.
And the physicality of the game, it's so much of it seems handcrafted. It's all handcrafted by you, right? For the most part, aside from the things that you're actually printing out. For
the most part. I mean, obviously all the paper things are printed, but a lot of them were like hand-drawn or handwritten before they were printed.
Legit, like, what's your process here? Because the amount of stuff that must be prepared specifically for the person who's going to receive their copy of this, there's a lot of things going on. Like, are you manufacturing things in batches? Are you custom making each one to order? I mean, I know it's the same game that people are going to get, but do you make them one at a time? Do you know how much time you're spending in general to actually manufacture one complete set to someone? The amount of labor that must go into this thing is incredibly intensive.
I actually have been keeping track of how long.
Too long.
Yeah, kind of. But when I had kind of an idea of what was actually going to go into it, I was trying to figure out of how many copies I was going to be able to make.
Right.
And with certain things, I really didn't want to outsource them. So it was either make a limited amount and like assemble them by hand, or make a lot and, get them shipped from somewhere far away. So I opted to just end up doing 500. So it's just the limited edition game. And once they're gone, I probably won't make any more. But so everything that is not hand assembled, I basically have sitting in boxes in my house. And I kind of put them together in batches. So like every month I'll just put a bunch of envelopes together, put a bunch of boxes together.
The box, the physical object, the box, and that's all I'm going to describe out of it. Is that something that you order to be laser cut, or is that something that you are laser cutting yourself?
I order it to be laser cut, and then I assemble them myself.
I can't imagine.
If I had a laser cutter, I would absolutely laser cut them myself.
I can't imagine what it's like to be the person manufacturing that and to be like, what is this madness that is being ordered from me? Like, what on earth is this person doing? This is bananas.
Yeah, I think they have thought that, and I had actually some trouble like shifting around finding like a permanent vendor to make them for me, and I'm sure they're not super happy about all the tiny pieces.
Totally. Well, this is your first game that you've published as PostCurious and that you've designed. I keep on saying publish, but I think it's really important to say that you are the designer of this. Like, you created this incredibly intricate and very, very impressive thing, regardless of what you end up wanting to call it. I fundamentally believe that it is a game, but it is also an experience, and it is also a puzzle, and it is also a narrative adventure. But with it being your first project that you put out in mass like this, going into the hands of all kinds of people out there, have you gotten any negative feedback out of it? Like, are there any people who have just like completely hated the game? And if so, how do you deal with the negative feedback from a broad audience or from strangers out there just talking about your game? Or if not direct negative feedback about the game itself, surely you've had to deal with people talking about the cost of the game, because that's a huge hurdle for the Tale of Ord, I imagine, to get people to actually buy in at the higher price point.
Well, thankfully, I haven't gotten anybody who has hated it yet, or at least not to my knowledge. People definitely have had, some negative feedback, but most of it was pretty constructive, and much of the feedback has, been things that I might agree with and be like, yeah, I realized that, and the game is not perfect and nothing is perfect, and it's something that I'm working to improve on for the next game. The cost is definitely a hurdle, and it might be the biggest hurdle, I don't know. But so far, people who have finished it have all said that it was totally worth the cost, which makes me feel pretty good. But there are a lot of reasons for why it costs that much. And I've thought about this a lot, and it's also interesting because the pricing is really relative. Yeah. So like one ticket to an escape room is like $30, mm-hmm. and one mystery box that is a subscription box is like $30. But but then you could get a board game for $30 that you can replay like 50 times. Whereas the other two things you can only play once. Mm-hmm. And in the end, you get about 16 to 20 hours of gameplay out of this, and like pretty nice quality components, and a lot of development that went into it. Yeah. So, but value is like a very relative thing, and I acknowledge that it's a lot of money, but I tried to price it in a way that seemed at least pretty reasonable, because I've seen similar things for like $300, and I wanted it to be at least something that I could afford if I knew that it was really good.
Totally. And also, that's why you got reviews out there, is for people like me to get into it and be like, yo, I don't know what your financial situation is. Maybe this is a little bit on the high end for what you expect to pay for a tabletop game, but the amount of hours of enjoyment and the potency of enjoyment to dollar ratio is totally there. Like, I will never have an experience like I had with my wife playing through the 4 chapters of this again. Hopefully I have a new experience with the next PostCurious game, and I 100% am going to be there. But like, You're right. It is relative. Value is a hard thing to measure or quantify for people. But if you are willing to put down money on going to the movies, if you're willing to put down money to go to an escape room or something.
Or like a Broadway show is like, $300.
Well, some of us live in Alaska and don't have access to Broadway shows, Rita. Hamilton ain't coming to Juneau, Alaska.
Well, Hamilton ain't coming to me because there's like probably a year-long wait.
True. Very true.
Even if I live in the same city, I still have not seen it.
Oh, man. That's like... I've been trying to pay attention to when Hamilton was going to go to like Seattle or something, and we were thinking about making a trip down there. And the moment that tickets go on sale for something like that, it is just gone in an instant. And so I'm like, man, don't have access to anything. Yeah,
you need like 5 people sitting at different computers that all go on at the exact same time that the tickets go on sale, and like maybe one of you will get it.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about this game, but what about the next game? What's on the horizon? Do you know, like, when this is going to come out? Do you have some ideas of what it's going to be? Is there anything that you can share to kind of entice and intrigue people?
A little bit.
A little bit? Give me some flavor here.
Well, nothing's set in stone, and I also don't want to, like, give away too much before I really know the answers, but... it's sort of in its starting development stages, so we're working on the story, and I've got some of the puzzles, but it's still pretty much like all in my sketchbook and a 20-page long Google Doc. So hopefully soon I can start like prototyping some more physical objects. I'm hoping that it'll be out like next summer, but who knows?
Right,
because I also know that everything always takes longer than you think it will, which is always the rule in woodworking for sure. Like if you think it's going to take you 2 hours, it'll probably take 4. It's just how things happen. So that's my goal next summer. But
have you ever considered making conventional tabletop games? Like now that you've had more exposure and more research on this kind of stuff, have you been working around some ideas in your brain, or are you 100% focused on this is what PostCurious is and does, and Rita Orlov is synonymous with PostCurious?
I've thought about it a little bit, but I think at this moment, I actually all of a sudden recently have had so many ideas for more of these types of games that I'm actually like, I don't have time to make all of these things that I want to make, which is also always the problem. But I'm kind of interested in, it's almost like a different medium that I don't think has really been explored, and I don't think I've explored it nearly as much as I want to, because I don't have experience designing like regular board games, and maybe I will one day, but I feel like I'm kind of, I don't know, you get into like an art style and you kind of explore that for a while until you feel like you want to move on to something else.
Right. Like, I feel like the only way that you are going to end up designing a board game is if it is a component within one of these narrative adventure puzzle experiences in which playing the board game is going to in some way inform you as you go through and you get some answer or clue by making certain moves.
That's actually a really cool idea.
You need to honor your dad by having some sort of chess variant or some sort of puzzle in there that really plays to that upbringing.
Yeah, that's something to think about for sure. But yeah, I've been thinking more about this recently, and it's kind of like, I think about it as kind of like making art and sort of using packages as like a way of telling a story and a way of presenting a game and an experience.
Right.
So I just think there's so much more to explore within that realm.
What's something that you actually learned as a practical skill through the development of Tale of Ord? Like, was there anything that you didn't know before, but as a consequence of trying to figure out some sort of puzzle, or you were trying to integrate some artistic element, that you developed a new legitimate skill or interest that you didn't have before?
Well, I did learn a little bit about drawing knots.
Yeah, you sure did.
Which was pretty fun, actually. I mean, like, learning how to draw new things is super fun. And I'm starting to, as I start to work on this new game, I'm trying to do some watercolor, which I hope to include in the actual game. So it's really just like a separate outlet, but it's really nice to get back into drawing and be able to incorporate that into the actual game. Yeah, and I mean, I hadn't really done any sort of mechanical components before, so figuring out how to make that box and the mechanism that works inside of it was also a journey.
I bet, because it is certainly mind-blowing from the outset. Like, to me, it is either madness or black magic or a combination thereof that resulted in that thing, and I couldn't even begin to comprehend the intricacies. It's like when someone listens to a symphony trying to digest every moving part within it in order to create that ultimate sound. Like, looking at that thing, I'm just like, man, this is wild. This is some next level stuff. This is why someone goes to college and spends a dramatic amount of time researching mechanisms and woodworking and all kinds of craziness like that. That is some awesome stuff there.
I mean, learning these things is definitely one of the best things about, designing and making games.
All right, so let's try to wrap it up with something that is just kind of a broader question to get a real good feel for you as a creator, as an artist, as someone who's publishing things, who's making things. Like, what are some things that really inspire you? And it doesn't have to be centered completely around games. It can be, the things that make you feel most creative and like you can just make things for the world.
I really actually just get inspired by looking at things around me, as sort of cliche as that sounds. Like, when you really stop and look at something for a while, like anything natural or just like architecture or anything that kind of grabs your attention, like definitely when traveling, there are a lot of interesting things that I discover. And there are a lot of things that I see in the street where I'm like, this could be a puzzle. And I take a picture of it and I put it in a folder, and later at some point I'll look back on it. Actually, on that note, I'm also working on another game which is an outside sort of puzzle walking exploration game.
Really?
Which will be in New York, so not only locally playable, unfortunately. But there's a company called Crux Club, and right now they have one game. It's called Oddfellow's Secret, and it's that kind of game, and you're walking around the East Village in Manhattan, but it's using a bunch of, you're going from location to location, and it's like almost in a way that a scavenger hunt might be, but you're not scavenging for anything. But it uses like architectural elements and actual, places in the area and the history of the area to tell a story as you solve puzzles to progress through it. So I'm collaborating with the owner of Crux Club on another game.
That sounds awesome. And like a trippy way to have my first experience in New York City. I need to get around to visiting my brother who lives in Yonkers. So, maybe he and I can enjoy this crazy experience together as I'm taking in everything that is New York as well as trying to keep my focus on whatever this pervasive game adventure is at the same time. Well, that sounds awesome, and I'm really excited about everything that you have going on. Like the article, the review of chapters 1 and 2 of Tale of Ord, I talk about how this really legitimized like a whole new way of playing games for me. You know, in the way that cooperative games kind of started cropping up, and then there were a few games that really cemented like this is a legitimate new way of experiencing games, and we've seen different evolutions in tabletop gaming, and I think that this is the first time where this attempt to have these narrative puzzle elements has truly clicked together and made me just hungry for the future and the innovation that's going to come out of it. If you have any interest in anything that we talked about today, then check out the PostCurious website. It's at getpostcurious.com. And on there, you can get like a free postcard sent to you that has a puzzle within it. That's kind of like a prelude, a little enticer, an appetizer to the Tale of Ord. And it's free, so that way you can check it out. And if you dig that, then I can't recommend it enough. All right. Well, then thank you so much, Rita, for coming on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to having you back on the next time that we get around to either just talking PostCurious, we're talking maybe a spoiler cast down the road for Tale of Ord, or maybe it's just talking about the next project that you have going on. So thanks again for coming on to the show. Yeah.
Thanks again so much for having me. And if anybody is going to be around at Indiecade in LA or at PAX Unplugged in Philly, find me and say hello.
Awesome. I'll be doing that in Philly for sure. Thank you for listening to the Cardboard Herald. As always, everything we do is ad-free and audience-supported. If you'd like to help keep it that way, find the Patreon link at the top of our webpage, cardboardherald.com. We have several levels of support with various rewards. If you enjoyed the show, we do a whole bunch of other stuff, including reviews, interviews, and recommendations across writing, podcasts, and video. You can find that on our YouTube channel or by visiting any of our social media or our website. So with that out of the way, thank you again for listening to the Cardboard Herald.